Welcome to the Spoiler Room, 8 weeks of Alfred Hitchcock. The next 8 episodes we will be covering some films that are known and not so known of Alfred Hitchcock's. We hope you enjoy the show and aren't too scared. If you do get scared, please pause the podcast, have a drink, come back and finish the podcast. Thank you and enjoy.
And welcome, my friends. It is 8 weeks of Hitchcock here in the spoiler room. I figured we'd close out 2018 exploring some films that are known and not so known with Alfred Hitchcock. It's going to be a learning experience for me because most of these I haven't watched because I stopped at Psycho and I was like, I'm good. But there are many films out there in the Alfred Hitchcock catalog, and we will be discussing them over the course of these next few weeks. Last week we did Notorious, and this week we have Rear Window. And joining me tonight in the spoiler room to talk about Jimmy Stewart-led film, we have none other than the diva of the spoiler room. Dawn is with us tonight. Hello, Dawn.
Good evening, Mark. Good evening, David.
Good evening.
And yes, you heard it right. David is back with us in the spoiler room as well from Inside Movies Galore. Hello, David. How are you?
I'm doing okay, folks. How is your evening?
Well, so far so good. The white powdery stuff has held off, so there is that. It's just cold, but that's it's November, so it wouldn't be Thanksgiving if you didn't have your winter jacket on. So, but tonight, yes, we are talking Rear Window. And David, did you want to give the synopsis of Rear Window, directed by Mr. Alfred Hitchcock?
Sure. So apparently we have Jimmy Stewart somewhat headlining this feature film, and he plays a photojournalist who has evidently had some kind of an accident of sorts, which has waylaid him for whatever amount of time. I think it was 6 weeks.
It was 6 weeks, yeah.
And just so happens that his apartment faces a bunch of bay windows where he can see into the lives of evidently several characters, and he somewhat involves himself in kind of a whodunit kind of a mystery, but also kind of has his own thoughts on life as the film goes on.
Well, are you making a character judgment of me? I don't like that, David.
You bet your darn ass I am.
Mr. Alfred Hitchcock directed a fairly decent film, I might add. You might want to choose your words wisely there. Sorry, I can't.
Who are you again?
I'm Jimmy Stewart. So The Rear Window. This is a very interesting film because after I watched it, I thought it was awesome, but I also felt like I needed to take a shower.
Yeah, it's really, you get so swept up in the story that about halfway through you kind of go, wait a second, is he really the good guy in this?
Thank you. Yeah. Because, well, and it's Alfred Hitchcock's setup. And I really think, and I want to get both your opinions to see if you agree or disagree or have a different view on it. But I really think the opening shot of this film serves more than just establishing our little stories that we're peering through the windows, because you get this wonderful sweeping shot of the set, because it pretty much takes place all from the perspective of one room. And you get this wonderful sweeping shot where you get to see all these perspective from Jimmy Stewart's room, which I know I'm going to be calling him probably just Jimmy Stewart all night. It's L.B. Jeffries. You get a shot from his room, and you get to see the main players that we'll be observing throughout the film. But not only does this establish these little stories that we will be seeing, how some of them might be loosely tied together or not, but it also immediately puts the audience in the chair of the voyeur, which is a little salacious and a little unnerving a bit, but it puts you in the exact same spot that Jimmy Stewart is in, that he's been peering on these guys for a while. So before you ever see Jimmy Stewart, you as the audience are being a voyeur into these people's lives, because you stay on them just long enough to get a little bit of a glimpse of what's going on in their homes as they think they're safe and no one's watching them. And you as an audience are now put in that same position that Jimmy Stewart is now in. Am I off on that, Dawn? Does this help establish and kind of connect you with Jimmy Stewart to make this kind of forbidden act a little bit more acceptable to the audience?
It does, but Alfred Hitchcock goes so much further. He in this whole beginning establishing shot, he is he's giving the audience all the information they need to know. It is torturously hot, so everybody's windows are open, the curtains are open so that it's not stifling inside. This is pre-air conditioning.
I mean, just to take a look at remember the couple that was laying up outside on their balcony because it was so hot.
Yes, and the way people are dressed, it in windows open with when after panning through the courtyard and seeing all the open windows and kind of setting up the heat and setting up all of that, when the camera pans into LB Jeffrey's room, the first thing you see is a very sweaty James Stewart.
Yes.
And then it pans through his broken legs, the shot of the camera to tell you what he was, the picture that he took of the car accident, which tells you how he broke his leg, and yada, yada, yada. I mean, in one single pan shot, it sets up and gives you everything you need to know.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it serves so many great purposes, and it sets up, I think this helps immediately connect the audience, put you in the seat of Stewart, know everything you need to know, and get going. And the shot isn't more than a few minutes. David, what do you think of this opening scene and that? Do you think it establishes it, plus gets you into that voyeur role right away, so you kind of accept Jimmy's actions a little bit more?
Well, kind of, because I mean, the opening shot basically, it shows that Jimmy is perspiring, obviously, because it's so hot. And then it pans to each of the stories, and you get, I mean, I was even looking at some, and this was the first time that I actually had probably looked at some of the what was beyond, evidently this is a courtyard that he's looking out into.
Right.
I mean, in the background, you see, some kids playing in the street after a vehicle, so there is obviously a neighborhood that is nearby. And, you see some people cross in between that alleyway, but yeah, you get to see the different lifestyles. You even get to see what is it, that one couple has. Or did that happen in the opening shot?
The newlyweds, that happens just after, because Jimmy Stewart starts his peeping Tom thing already.
Yep.
And that's when he pictures the newlywed couple that's off to his left, that have the shades down after they
what I liked,
embrace.
and what I was kind of comically somewhat chuckling about, is the fact that his his photojournalist boss had called him on the phone, and
yeah,
he was talking about married people, and he was talking about how wives, evidently in his neighborhood, wives still nag, and
right.
You see the nagging couple,
Mm-hmm. But yeah. So we get Jimmy Stewart, and he's doing his voyeuristic thing, and he's watching the different people. But what I think also makes it a little bit understanding, still, let's face it, it's still it's, what he's doing throughout this whole movie is skeevy. It
Oh.
really is. But at the same time, you do kind of understand because he is a photojournalist. He's a news guy. And
Yep.
so that's his job, to observe things and capture things. So well, go ahead, Don.
Even more than that, he views everything at it, even more than his job. That's how he sees the world.
Mhm.
As a journalist, everything is filtered through that lens. So even before he ended up being laid up for 6 weeks in his tiny two-room apartment, everything even prior to that was seen through that camera lens. That's normal for him. He would not see that as anything but normal.
No, and I think what's interesting too is the way he sees things, and just something now while we're talking, him being a photojournalist, in a way, he's looking at moving pictures because of the frames of the windows are the edges of the photos, and he's basically almost looking at like a photo album of
Yeah.
the square.
Yeah, I see that.
Dave, what do you think? Do you see that, baby? Maybe a little bit. That
I
could.
do because if you think of like the old Kodak, push button photos that used to come out and they'd be all square. If you held that up against each window, it would almost be like a photograph of. I mean, in that opening shot, I kept thinking that ballerina girl was kind of like a Barbie doll,
Almost, yeah. And as it might be a little bit whatever to the audience, you realize his sole motivation for this is because, though, as mentioned, he's a photojournalist. This is his entire career, his life. He's looking for stories. So he's not doing this like looking at the ballerina or looking at the other. He's not doing this for stimulation, so to speak. This is his inherent nature, I think.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, I'm glad you brought that up because in that one scene with the always amazing Thelma Ritter, Stella, um, she had actually mentioned that there was something wrong with him after looking at all those women for so long and not having any sort of reaction to them.
Right. Yeah. She is confused by the fact of his motivation for actually looking at these people.
Mhm.
Because she's like, well, she would look. She's like, but he's looking through everything. And of course, yeah, we have a pianist who I thought was wonderful. I loved the fact that, and I could be wrong on this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but almost all the music in this entire movie comes from that pianist.
Except except for the very beginning intro music.
Yes.
All of the music that is in that movie comes from the set, either from that pianist or from the other parties or other things going on in within the story. There is no external narrative, voiceover style music at all in the movie. It's one of the most outstanding things about the movie.
But you don't realize it.
No.
I mean, you're so into this film, you don't realize that, oh, wait, all of this music is coming from that guy's apartment. To which we get the Alfred Hitchcock moment at some point early in the movie. Alfred Hitchcock makes his appearance in this film, adjusting the clock for the pianist. So you get your telltale Alfred Hitchcock story. But we get to Jimmy Stewart, who focuses in on this couple who seem to be the most interesting out of the group. And yeah, David, how'd you like this setup, or what do you think of this with him and how he kind of ended up suspecting them out of all these stories going on in the square? What is it, do you think, that made him focus on these people so intently in the beginning? Because there doesn't seem to be too much different from the rest of them.
Well, the fact that I mean, in a way, that particular apartment was like dead center, like to his viewpoint. So it's kind of hard not to, it seemed like he was in the apartment that was adjacent to and perpendicular to that apartment in the first place. So I could see how he could focus particularly on that particular storyline. I mean, he's talking about, nagging in the very beginning, and he's referring to the woman, and then I think he's talking to someone, and then the man and his woman disappear, and then he's like, well, wait, he remembers, him doing something, and then the wife was gone, and then that's when he started noticing,
Right.
started paying more attention to what the man did afterwards.
Yeah, like wrapping saws in brown paper.
Correct.
And such, all through his camera lens. While
Also, the dog from the one couple that was evidently living on the balcony.
right.
They kept letting the dog down in the garden, and when it kept sniffing in that certain corner, of the garden, that was kind of strange too to him.
Yeah, it was strange. And I loved how they dropped the little dog down in the basket. Down.
That was so cute.
That was adorable. Poor doggy. Later on faces some kind of.
David makes a good point. It's very hard with the Thorwalds there. It's very hard to miss the fact that they are directly opposite the courtyard from each other. And it's like the first people they would see. But I think it's even a little more than that, because why Jeffries would take an interest in that, because he mentions that Mrs. Thorwald is an invalid, and suddenly she goes missing. And
Right.
Mr. Thorwald's been taking care of her this whole time, and suddenly she's gone. And here's L.B. Jeffries all laid up like an invalid, feeling very, very helpless.
Ooh.
Does anyone get the sense that he has actually been watching these people for quite some time?
The entire time he's been laid up.
Correct. Like, he already knows their routines by the time we pan in on this story.
Yeah, well, he does, because Stella mentions how he seems obsessed with looking out his window constantly through this whole ordeal, because she comes in and gives him the therapy, the physical therapy in that. But yeah, he's definitely comfortable around these people. I mean, he's so comfortable. He knows exactly how far back he's got to wheel his wheelchair so he's out of sight and he can still peep in on people.
He already has nicknames for them all without even knowing their real names.
Yeah, he's created nicknames for all. He knows routine. Miss Lonely Hearts, the one who has dinner by herself.
Her imaginary romance.
Yeah. And then the older lady who lives next to her, the artist, the elderly artist, who is which I thought was an interesting thing, that you had the older lady who was an artist, a sculptor, and that, and then you had the young lady who lived above her, who was an artist as well.
Did you catch that when she came out, the older lady came out and laid herself in the lawn chair, that I think that she was trying to catch the attention of the man who had the invalid wife?
Thorwald? I got that impression in the beginning, Dawn. What about you? I think it felt like that a little bit, maybe.
Just a little bit, because you know how you have that neighbor that just wants the attention of the other neighbor just because she's just that lonely and desperate for attention.
Maybe. Dawn, what do you think?
Are you talking about Miss Lonely Heart, or are you talking about?
No, the elderly lady who does the statues.
Oh,
You know, the one that
I must have missed that, because
oh
the
yeah.
only I really noticed.
Well, yeah, she came out onto the lawn chair, and then it's like she was sunning herself,
Mhm.
and that's about the time when older guy who had the invalid wife came out and attended his garden, and then she went over in her two-piece, or was it a one-piece? I'm not sure, really
It
sure.
was two-piece.
Okay, yeah, that was kind of unflattering on her. But she went over and she was trying to socialize with him, I think.
Right. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, I remember that part now. Yeah.
yeah,
I think that was more to establish that he was antisocial
Okay.
oh yeah. Yeah,
and unneighborly.
that is Mr. Lars Thorwald,
Yeah,
which
that's Thorwald.
which is Raymond Burr with a powdered hair.
And I kept looking at him thinking, he's so young.
I know. He's not really that young in here, though. I mean, not as young as he was in Godzilla.
Well, maybe not, but I mean, he still looked young. I mean, Raymond Burr overall kind of aged very well, especially back then. But I mean, you know, he was what? Because this was 54.
This is 54.
So he was 37.
Yeah, he was so young.
He was 37, but they tried to make him look so much older with the powdered hair.
Yeah, they did.
It was like when I saw Raymond Burr in the credits, I was like, oh, really? And I'm waiting for it. And I'm waiting for it. And I'm like, wait, where's Raymond Burr? For most of the film, I'm sitting there going, wait, is he Thorwald? No, he can't be. Well, that's got white hair, but that's badly whited hair. Wait, is that? That was horrible, but I'm like,
I guess they gave him Parliament hair.
they did. I'm not sure why. Well,
they were. I watched a documentary about this recently, because I fell asleep last time, so I had extra time. Sorry. That decision, the gray curly wig and some of the mannerisms was an intentional choice, because it was Alfred Hitchcock picking on another producer that he really didn't like. And I can't remember what the producer's name was, but it was an intentional choice.
But because of course it would be with Alfred Hitchcock, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to find the information, but yeah, it was a very specific choice to have him do that. It was the curly wig, the glasses, and the way he cradled the phone were specifically mentioned as a nod to this director or producer that Alfred Hitchcock did not like. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I can't remember the name of the guy.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm seeing really quick if it shows up in. Oh, here we go. That's why David O. Selznick.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, according to Ibidem, Sir Alfred Hitchcock supposedly hired Raymond Burr to play Lars Thorwald because he could easily made to look like his old producer, David O. Selznick, who Sir Alfred Hitchcock felt interfered too much with his work.
There you go. You found it. Thank you. Yeah, that is a bit of trivia that I specifically remembered from the documentary I watched.
The fact that he could thumb his nose at past producer shows that Alfred Hitchcock had balls.
Yeah, he didn't really care. Well, I mean, you know, he's an established British guy, and then he came over and, hey, he's in the U.S. Screw you guys. I'm going to do it my way. So what's interesting is, you know, we mentioned a little bit of dichotomy things going on here. There's one in particular that, Dawn, it just came to mind again. That's why I love doing this show. You guys are awesome. Just came to mind. Here we have Jimmy Stewart, who's laid up, basically invalid, focusing on a couple to where a man is taking care of his wife, who's an invalid, who disappears. Jump to L.B. Jeffries' situation. He's an invalid who has a girlfriend who is trying to take care of him in the form of Grace Kelly.
And what an introduction to her character, huh?
Beautiful.
And we have Miss Grace Kelly here, who is very interesting. This is a very interesting relationship. Dawn, what do you think about it between these two? Here we have the rough and tumble photojournalist and Miss Society of sorts. Well, not sorts, Miss Society, Lisa Carol Fremont.
To be fair, it makes sense.
Those were the lamps.
You get the photographer, you get the
model.
The model. It makes sense that they would meet and be interested in each other. But what you don't expect is what a strong character she is.
Yes.
And how much they love a mystery together.
And she when they're first talking about their relationship and why it's not going to work.
They come from two different worlds.
And then she gets drawn into his little intrigue and drawn out of her shell. He sees just how strong she can be, which is pretty awesome. But she still manages to be the perfect woman.
And tall.
I don't know anybody who's not in love with this woman.
Grace Kelly is awesome.
Yes. I like their introduction to each other because at the end he's like, "Who are you?"
Well, I like this introduction because it felt almost like Alfred was getting, in the first scenes where we have them together, is getting that whole bit with relationship out of the way. More, you know, to go back to the whodunit. But he knows you're going to have questions with her, you know, Grace Kelly and Jimmy Stewart, you know, together, people are going to have questions and wonder about the relationship. And is it, you know, how it is. So we get all that relationship bit in this first scenes here where they're debating about being together or whatnot. But then we don't really come back to them as far as talking to each other because they become focused on the couple and start sharing that mystery. But I just kind of like that, how he kind of got the romance part out of the way.
They get the romance part out of the way, and then they get swept up in the mystery. But then there's the one scene where she definitely proves that she is a woman of her own mind when she determines that she is spending the night.
Oh, yes.
In 1954, she is spending the night.
To which Grace Kelly already had a bit of a reputation of being a free spirit. Which made for an interesting scene, which showed you the 50s, because this is later on in the movie, folks. Grace Kelly, they're wrapped up in the mystery, and so she wants to stay. And Jimmy Stewart's like, I'm not sure. Might have to clear that with the landlord and then go back for it. But no, she comes back and she stays, and she's got a overnight bag, which is actually an overnight bag that's like the TARDIS, I think. Because she's got like everything you need in this, like
just a little nightie and some slippers.
I'm like, wow, okay.
all you need. Where's
I
the
I guess, but then Jimmy Stewart's, LB Jeffries' buddy cop comes over, Doyle, played by Wendell Corey. He's been kind of being bothered by by LB Jeffries throughout this, who suspects some strange things afoot in the Thorwald household. And so Doyle comes over to let, Jimmy Stewart, keep doing that. I am so sorry, folks. LB Jeffries, though, that, hey, yeah, all your suspicions so far have come up false, but he keeps staring at the nightie in the night.
The I Dream of Jeannie costume?
Yeah, but I mean, he's like focused on it. He's like, huh. And
Once you get to the ideas.
Yeah. I thought that was just a funny, it shows you the culture back then, because, LB Jeffries is just like, yeah, what are you looking at, Doyle? What do you think? What? Yeah? She's going to stay. So what? But I mean, it does show kind of the sign of the times, I think, she's his girlfriend, but they're not married, but she's staying overnight. How
I guess Doyle is just used to their carefree days in the army, where every girl was for every man for himself.
I guess kind of, yeah. Yeah, I did like that, the fact that they were army buddies, which it's 54, so that's still fresh. And given the age of the characters, yeah, they'd be in the army, so they kind of share that experience. But the Doyle character is interesting. I mean, here he is, this married guy, and he's kind of humoring his buddy LB Jeffries. But you do get the impression he does kind of suspect things, but he almost more so thinks that his buddy's kind of gone off the deep end. Don, what'd you think of Doyle in this?
I thought he was handled very well.
Mm-hmm.
He was not just the yes man cop trying to get vehicle doing the in. He was the voice of reason, saying, witnesses saw her get on the train. Witnesses saw her get off the train. People saw her and talked to her. Did you verify who she was? Why would we need to? We looked at the trunk. There were clothes in the trunk. There was no bloody body parts in the trunk. Why is this still an issue? He was very much the voice of reason, and not really without any evidence looking to seek further. He wasn't inept, and he was believing in what Jeffries was telling him to a point, to a reasonable point. Right up until, the breaking and entering and getting evidence.
Yes, which again, folks, here we have a story. It's in 54. We have your male lead, Jimmy Stewart. You have the wonderful Grace Kelly. You have these two roles. But since LB Jeffries is trapped in his room with his broken leg, you actually have the female lead doing all the dirty work.
Mm-hmm.
And doing it well.
And taking all the risks and getting into all the danger.
Yes, but willingly doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And enjoying doing so to an extent. When you get that scene later on when they're suspecting what might be in the garden, and they think maybe something is there, Stella is going with, and Fremont, she doesn't hesitate to just crawl over the wrought iron spike fence.
No, she doesn't. And then hop from the balcony to the window.
Yeah, because
I actually remember the first time I saw this movie and saw that scene and went, "That is so cool! I want to be her."
That was so badass that she couldn't get in through the one door, so she left. You're like, holy crap!
All the while in a party dress and heels.
All the while in a party dress and heels too, because that's my exact thought. Going, wow, she's doing all that in heels and a dress. That's That's damn impressive. David, what do you think of her doing the dirty work in that and enjoying it? Do you think this is maybe a break a little bit from what you've seen other female leads in 54?
I would say that, at this point in time, yes, because I mean, women were entirely, headstrong as far as taking the lead in something like this. So I think it was a daring move.
Yeah, in a good way. It fit the plot too. It wasn't like, although I'm thinking nowadays, if this came out, people would say, "Oh, well, they just have her doing everything because social justice, whatever." But back in the day, it fit the context of the story, her character, and it was so cool to have her do this because your male lead is stuck in a chair the entire time. All he can do is look, and you feel helpless for him. How'd you feel, David? I mean, when you get that scene where you get later in the act where she's looking for the jewelry, and Thorwald shows up. I mean, you're observing it all from the window, but is that scene still intense, even though you're not really up close and personal to everything?
It really is intense because you're watching this happen, and he's Mr. Thornwald is coming into to the room just as she's going into that other room, and you're seeing this all happen, and it's like it's kind of hard to describe because it's like you're watching something happen when nobody knows that you're watching,
Right.
and you kind of get a guilty thought. Well, maybe I should be seeing this, but in the same respect, you're like, oh my God, what is going to happen next?
Well, and by this time in the movie, when this happens, where she gets caught by Thornwald, you've watched through a lot of people's windows during the course of this film. But you still kind of feel a little guilty, but it's far away, yet it's still intense. Dawn, do you think that's part of the magic of this film, is the fact that you get a scene like this to where you're not really up close and personal, but it's still really tension filled?
It's one of those it's one of those incredible filming techniques that Hitchcock used. You're watching from a distance. That distance is key, so that you feel it's far enough away that you feel helpless and you know that nobody's going to get there in time to help her. But then he pans back and you see Jeffrey's reaction, Jeffrey and Stella's reaction, and then it goes, so you can see his helplessness, and it just spikes your own helplessness and anxiety, and builds the suspense as they pan back and forth between the drama happening between Thorwald and Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
and then panning back to Jeffries and Stella, and back and forth, and that tension just builds and builds and builds. And if you didn't feel helpless enough watching the one, you felt even more helpless because you couldn't help the other either.
Yeah.
Brilliant technique.
It is. He grabs you and puts you there, and you feel helpless, and you feel connected to these characters through all this, and you don't even realize it's happening until you get to this part. He just eases you into it. But I mean, it's just like you even get that though with Miss Lonely Hearts.
Yeah.
Don't you? I mean, it's a sub story, but didn't he add tension with that one too? You know which scene I'm talking about too.
Yeah, it's that same scene where Lisa's in with Thorwald, and they're cutting back, and they're talking about how, oh my gosh, she has enough of those red pills in order to really do some damage, and they're still keeping an eye on both of them, calling the police for the one, but then ending up calling the police for the other.
Yeah, that's whole scene. You got so much going on. It's like, wow. And Miss Lonely Hearts, you feel for her because we saw that she picked up a date. She actually got some companionship and then freaked out on him. So
Uh,
then, you know, earlier
well, he was being wildly inappropriate.
he was being a little too forward. Yes. As well. So it both was just an ugly situation. So you felt for her, and then you see her the next night or whatever with the pills, and you're just like, oh my god, no, don't do that. I mean,
Yep.
yet we don't actually meet any of these people personally. We
Mm-mm.
still feel connected to every single one, and I think that's Alfred's art in this one, is that you have all these almost like a little anthology thing going on to where you have all these little stories, and yet, you feel for them. The musician guy, he has his party going on, and you feel good for him because, okay, he actually has people there now, because he seemed a bit lonely. And
Mhm.
then you had Miss Torso, who seemed to have a variety of different people in her apartment to
Yeah.
entertain.
Or
Um,
booze.
huh?
Or booze.
Or booze. She's a bit of a free spirit. You had the couple to the left who, the poor guy who couldn't apparently get a break from his newlywed wife.
I kind of felt for him.
What?
I kind of felt for him.
No sympathy.
No sympathy. Don had no sympathy for him.
Just a little bit.
Why would that be done? No.
Hey, he carried her over the threshold. Well, after he forgot for a moment. But
Yeah.
he did the romantic thing and was nice.
Yes. But we get so many elements here with the Thorwald character, and of course, as we get near the end, LB Jeffries is kind of caught by Mr. Thorwald finally, because you needed a confrontation between these two eventually. And even then, we don't leave the apartment. We see Thorwald leaving, and then you get that tension, wondering, is he really going to show up at Jeffrey's apartment? Is he not? And up until this point, before we finally get kind of the twist, the reveal, Dawn, do you think Alfred threw enough bit of misdirection to where he put enough question on whether, at least for the first time you see this, is Jeffries actually making this stuff up in his head? Almost up to that point, do you feel that way, that they established that enough?
I think right up until they slide the note under his door,
Mm-hmm.
and then make the phone call to get him out of the apartment so Lisa and Stella can go down and dig up the flowers.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
Right up until that point, the audience is left to wonder if he's just making up a fanciful story. But once Lisa gets in that apartment and has the confrontation with Thorwald, you know that he's guilty of something.
Right. He might not be exactly murder of his wife, but there's something fishy going on.
Yes, there's definitely something fishy going on.
Right. And I think
even up until when Thorwald goes into Jeffrey's apartment,
mm-hmm.
there's still some kind of, well, maybe it's not the worst thing that happened. Maybe we're still misunderstanding. Maybe.
Yeah.
And I think they keep it very ambiguous until the very end, after Thorwald takes his dive. Not Thorwald.
No,
Jeffries takes his dive, and the cop leans out the window and says, "Hey, he's ready to take us for a tour of the East River."
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Even when you have Thorwald in the confronting, you're like, is something else he guilty of? Maybe it's not murder. Oh, I don't know. And Doyle helped plant those seeds, I think, in your head enough, which is Doyle's character's purpose throughout this whole thing, is to sit there and add that, suspicion, because on the other side you have Stella, who is kind of feeding his suspicions.
Oh God, I love Stella. My favorite scene is that last scene with her.
Stella's
Thelma
awesome.
Ritter, she's fantastic.
Thelma Ritter was fantastic in that. But David, how about you? Do you think they threw enough at you to kind of question what Thorwald, if anything, he really is guilty of up until that point where he's trying to kill Jeffries?
I think they threw enough at us to be as involved and invested in the mystery of what was going on, because there were some inconsistencies with what Thorwald was doing. I mean, how often is it that a man that has an invalid wife, the next day you see him wrapping up some knives, and then of course you see all these suitcases by the bed. This does make you kind of curious. But I mean, what would you do if you were like stuck in front of a window in a cab that was so itchy that you had to get down there in your Menards and
make one of the many Jimmy Stewart faces. Very animated faces. So yeah, I think they throw enough in there for you to wonder whether or not this has been kind of in his head, and maybe Thorwald isn't actually guilty of murder. But no, Thorwald finally does lose it, and tries to drop Jeffries out a window. And the cops show up just in time because we finally have everything kind of resolved.
Before we go too far, what do you think of that defense that Jeffries used? His only line of defense.
Which one was that? I'm sorry.
The flashes for the camera.
Oh, yes, that's right. I'm glad you brought that up. So, folks, we have this final confrontation with Thorwald and Jeffries. He's in there, and Thorwald's coming after Jeffries, and he doesn't have a gun. He doesn't have a weapon. He can't do much, but he does have one thing: his flash bulbs.
Which he does not use as a bludgeon.
No, he uses the blind, which is an awesome effect for 1954 Alfred Hitchcock. Again, doing some cool things with visuals to where we get a point of view of Thorwald as he gets the flashes in the face. Because this is the only thing Jeffries has to defend himself is his camera. The camera is his tool to peer through things, and this accessory for the camera is his only defense. Otherwise he's rather vulnerable. I loved that. It made sense for his character. I loved how he suspected what was coming, so he prepared ahead of time by having it with him when Thorwald came into the room. Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I thought it was really interesting way to handle that and him try to fend off Thorwald. What about you, David?
Repeat what you just said.
The part with how he defended himself with the flash bulbs. What did you think about that?
I actually thought that was brilliant. I mean, the fact that it seemed like the Thorwald character, without his glasses, might actually be, that sensitive to that kind of, light. And at that point in time, cameras, the flashes, oh my God, when they flashed you, that would put anyone off center. I mean, when you get school pictures, when they used to do those flash bulb things, because I remember flash bulbs before the digital just a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was a really fitting defense for him. And it made sense because you almost think with him being a military guy, he's going to pull out a gun.
Although it kind of reminded me of when you saw military movies where they used used actual, gunpowder, where they'd have to fill the gunpowder up, and it would take time.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
where in with the flashes he actually had to wait for that flash to be ready.
Yeah. Well, and he had to get rid of the old bulb and put the new one in. So it was
Correct.
almost like reloading a gun, and they do say you shoot things with a camera. So, maybe metaphorically, he used it like a gun. But alas, it didn't thwart off Perry Mason for long. And old peppered hair Perry Mason's hanging him out the window. And the cops show up and get him just as time, but he does end up dropping Jeffries, which we see did injured. And I think you need this.
One other thing I want to say about that fight scene.
Yeah, go ahead.
During that fight scene that I noticed that they did not use music
Yes.
in any like narrative style overtone music, no suspenseful music, nothing. It was that scene that made me realize that that Hitchcock did not use ambient music, only whatever music was playing in the courtyard.
Well, and I think he did that for realism because the only thing you've got is the echoes of Stewart, his voice in that, which if any of us has ever lived in an urban area, when people are yelling out in the streets, it sounds just like that.
Uh-huh.
Which added to the realism of this and the gravity, no pun intended.
God.
Sorry, couldn't resist the gravity of the situation. But you're right. Usually, you would get music for this, dramatic confrontation with the main bad guy, and here we don't. We just get the echoes of the yelling in the courtyard, and that draws people out from their rooms. So now suddenly everybody who he's been spying on are now watching Jimmy Stewart. Well, LB Jeffries.
Yep, exactly.
Suddenly now he is being basically watched or peeped on by the people around that he's been watching. And yeah, he gets dropped. And he ends up breaking his other leg. And I think you need this. Yes, I know he's the hero, quote unquote hero. But I think you need a consequence.
Oh, definitely.
Because of what he's been doing these 6 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
I mean, even though he's the hero, you do need that because what he was basically doing was violating these people's privacy. I mean, it helped him catch a killer, but
they even had the discussion about that. Is it ethical? Is it moral to spy on somebody, even if you prove they're innocent of a thing?
Yeah, and they leave that up to the audience to really decide. You don't. I mean, they give their opinions, but it really does kind of like leave you going, well, were we supposed to be rooting for LB Jeffries?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and what's funny about this film is, and pardon if I may be on a little bit of a soapbox, I do apologize, but you could still apply the core themes of watching people's lives and sticking your nose in other people's business to today.
Oh, absolutely.
So you agree, Dot, that this still has social relevance today?
Absolutely. So here in Rear Window, you've got the everybody knows everybody else's business kind of attitude in a community like this, with the windows open and no apparent attempt at privacy for a lot of these people. Apply that to today, Twitter, Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
All you know is what's there, but half the time people have thousands of Facebook friends or MySpace friends or Instagram, Twitter, whatever, and people just post without thinking.
Right.
Post pictures, post videos, post status updates, ambiguous, specific,
In a,
whatever. They forget about their audience. It's the
Mhm.
same thing.
in a sense, wouldn't you say that Unfriended is kind of similar?
Unfriended is similar.
Because you're seeing things from a different window, except you're in that respect, even though it was a bad film, you see it from a bird's eye view. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
it's using that same concept.
Thematically, anything that is voyeuristic, I would say definitely draws from Rear Window.
Yes. What was the one film a number of years ago? I think
Was it Sliver?
no. You know which one I'm talking about? It's the one where the kid gets put on house arrest.
Oh, yes. Oh, for the love of God. I can see the poster in my head with the binoculars.
Yeah. You know which one I'm talking about. That's basically that was a version of Rear Window, I think.
Yeah.
What about Summer of '84? I mean, just recently.
I haven't seen that one yet. Is that one similar in theme?
In a sense, kind of like Disturbia.
There you go.
Thank you, Disturbia. Thank you, David. That's the one I was thinking of. Disturbia is exactly kind of a modern retelling of Rear Window in many ways. And in fact, I think that's what it was meant to be, in all honesty, if I remember correctly a bit.
Summer of '84, I was able to get a Blu-ray from a friend of mine, and able to watch it. You've got a group of 4 friends, kind of like strange. They're all watching their neighbor from across the street and trying to piece together a murder. And they all do it from his bedroom window somewhat, except they do some following, but much of it is done through binoculars, from the kid's bedroom window. So it's to me it's kind of similar.
Oh yeah, I've been meaning to check that out. So that's cool that it's along that lines. Oh, and there we go. Just looking up a little bit of trivia on Disturbia, because it does feel so much like Rear Window. If you folks don't mind humoring me a little, I got a little tidbit there. The copyright holders of Cornell's Woolrich's short story "It Had to Be Murder," which Rear Window was based on, sued DreamWorks, Paramount Pictures, and Steven Spielberg for using the story without permission.
Nice.
In 2010, the federal judge dismissed the suit, ruling the main plot points are similar only at a high, unprotectable level of generality, where Disturbia is rife with subplots. The short story has none. The setting and mood of the short story are static and tense, whereas the setting and mood of Disturbia are more dynamic and peppered with humor and teen romance. Wow. So they lost the lawsuit.
That's sad.
Which is,
although understandable.
I get that, but then, maybe the wrong people were going for the copyright thing. Maybe it should have been, it should have been, them going after the folks from Rear Window going after it, though. I think they're both owned by Paramount. So,
Yeah.
So they had the rights to it. But yeah, it's just an interesting tidbit because when I watched Disturbia, they're both Paramount Pictures, so just Paramount felt they could do whatever they wanted. So Disturbia, if you're looking for a little more modern version, not quite as well crafted, but still decent. It might turn people off because it has Shia LaBeouf in it. But it's a very good more modern version of this film, though I still Yeah, and I think we'll wrap it up here tonight. I still say you need to visit some of the classics, folks. Definitely check Rear Window out. Another film that is not your stereotypical 1954 film.
And even more, if you've never seen an Alfred Hitchcock movie, this is the epitome. It has every great thing, a taste of every great thing Hitchcock ever did
Yeah,
is sampled in
Yeah.
this movie somewhere.
I agree. I mean, when L.B. Jeffries fell from that window, you saw vertigo in a sense.
yeah.
Recaptured. I mean, you've got a little bit of his trademark around every corner, you know.
Yeah, well,
So
your Grace Kelly character, if you look at her character, is approach a bit similarity to Notorious, to the female in that character, the way he handles that character. She's a strong character in a
I
sense,
guess
In another
just
story, she might have been the femme fatale.
Yeah.
just be glad she wasn't Tippi Hedren.
Yeah, you do get those bits in here. The wonderful scenes that Alfred can do to where there's no dialogue, yet you got major storytelling going on.
Mhm.
I mean, you get those tension-filled moments, and you're right. This has got like a sample of all of the things that are signature Hitchcock are in Rear Window. And it's got a couple of known names that you should know out there. And yeah, this is a good gateway film for your Alfred Hitchcock, I think.
So I'm pretty sure. So this was the first Hitchcock movie I ever saw back in the early to mid 80s. Just after this film was completely restored, I was in junior high, and a girlfriend of mine and I went to see this movie at the theater. It was the first time I'd ever seen this movie. It was the first time I'd ever seen a Hitchcock movie. I thought it was a brand new release at the time.
Really?
I was young and foolish. But yeah, the I fell in love with Grace Kelly, wanted to be her. Who wouldn't have?
Right.
But yeah, this is one of those few movies that I can point to and say I remember everything about seeing this movie for the first time. And this movie influenced me.
Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, and it is not like your normal what you would maybe classify as a classic film, and we'd probably be saying this a lot with Alfred Hitchcock's films. It's got even though some of the references might be a little dated, this ages very well.
Yes,
This
it does.
this story, I think, ages beautifully for a film of its time, because you don't have too many things in here that truly date it to make you pull out of it, and it's got still common themes because voyeurism, yeah, internet culture. We are strife. It's everywhere.
I mean, the only thing dated is the telephone, the old dial telephone that you see in there. You know, I mean, that is the only dated thing that I mean, you don't see many of those in use as much
Right.
anymore.
Yeah. You don't. That's about the only thing with the phone, but everything else in here, it still fits today.
Oh yeah.
And and it's got a happy ending. Yay. Especially for everybody, because we even get tie-ups for all the stories. Which one, Don, was your favorite out of the little story tie-ups in the epilogue that we get?
I loved when Miss Torso's soldier boyfriend came home. That was the sweetest thing.
The little short,
Family.
the little short, nerdy soldier boy
Yes.
is the husband of the tall attractive ballerina, Miss Torso. I loved that reveal. I was like, that's awesome. And they are so happy. They're so happy. David, how about you? What was out of this epilogue that you get? Did you have one that kind of that you enjoyed the most out of?
I would have to say the sailor one was kind of unique, even though I did enjoy kind of singing that, Grace Kelly's character kind of ended up staying with him in the end through the whole process. He's got the double legs banged up.
Yeah, and
still sweating up a storm.
She's reading a travel guide for mountain climbing until she noticed he falls asleep. Then she goes right to her bizarre magazine, showing you she hasn't completely compromised herself for him, which was a nice touch. I liked, the one that made me smile the most was that, but what I really liked is the story of how they really bring, because the music guy is the one we don't look at the least. We know he's frustrated with his music. He's mostly providing the music for the scenes, but we've come to find, because we didn't mention earlier, just before Miss Lonely Hearts was going to commit suicide, she hears the music play by the piano player. So in the epilogue, she's sitting with the piano player and they're going over his music. And I'm like, that's awesome. It's like,
that is wonderful.
You're like invested in all these people by the end, and you didn't even realize you were until you get this epilogue, and you're just happy. The couple that had their dog die, they've got a new little puppy who they're training to stay in the basket, which made me nervous.
Because you don't want to see it go.
I don't want to see the puppy. Yeah, I don't want to see the puppy get too overzealous,
or fall off the darn basket before it gets to the bottom.
Right. So I think we'll wrap it up, folks. If you haven't guessed, yes, watch Rear Window. It's a great gateway Alfred Hitchcock film. It's just a great film, really. And we'll probably be saying this often with these films. And there's a reason why we're doing 8 weeks of Hitchcock. And it's for films like this. I haven't actually seen this one in quite some time. I do remember watching it a long time ago. And it's one I need to revisit more often, because this is just one of those where you get pulled in, and it keeps you there, and you're just like, this is amazing. And then you even realize, wait, we never leave his room. How do you tell a movie like this? Gets you so engrossed, and you don't
never leave his window.
You never leave his room. You don't even see his kitchen.
No, well,
you see part of it, but you never see his full kitchen.
Only when she orders the food and the waiter goes in and brings the food in, do you get to see a bare minimum of what the kitchen looks like.
Right. So you barely even see that. It's just all from his room, and you get totally engrossed, and it's what makes this film so really freaking cool. So I think we'll wrap it up here tonight. I want to thank my panel for joining us. Now this is the time where they get a license to shill, and they can tell you where you can find their stuff at when they aren't here, Grace Kellying us with their presence. So you like that? That was horrible. I know, that was a dad joke. I'm sorry. But now I'm thinking of Grace Kelly. So see what you did, Dawn. Go ahead, Dawn.
Well, she's a fantastic thing to think about, even, as a corpse. So you can find me in the audience.net.
I want to see a movie called The Corpse of Grace Kelly.
Corpse of Grace. Andrew!
Yeah, Andrew. The Corpse of Grace Kelly. There you go. And David, where can they find your stuff at, sir?
Well, you can find me on Facebook, YouTube at Inside Movies Galore currently, as I have been doing YouTube reviews on YouTube, as well as run my own discussion groups. Definitely check those out. Last week I've been sick, but I will be back with a vengeance this week. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you again both very much. Please, folks, check out their stuff. It's really great. And and now I think we'll just say good night. So say good night, all.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Hey, all my friends out there looking for more spoiler room goodness? Then why don't you check out our brand new Patreon page, patreon.com/specialmarkproductions, where you can get access to exclusive spoiler room episodes and a whole lot more. You can also find us on Facebook groups at SMPRD and on to Twitter at SpecialMarkPro. Let your voice be heard and let us know what you would like to see in the spoiler room, as well as just how we're doing in general. We appreciate your support, and remember, in the spoiler room, the conversation is fresh, but we do spoil the movies.